You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Welcome to Autumn on the Air. Today we're exploring a topic that's essential to the future of our profession. How do we train the next generation of tech transfer and commercialization leaders? And how do we help researchers on campus think about the real-world impact of their work from the very beginning? My guest today is someone who has built an innovative answer to both of those questions. Kendra Hargis-Stenzel is the Director of Innovation Talent Development at the University of Kentucky, where she works within Trust Hub as part of UK Innovate. Kendra's mission is to develop the next generation of innovation, commercialization, and entrepreneurial leaders by providing educational and experiential training opportunities that complement students' current studies. Kendra also works directly with researchers on campus to help them frame their research outcomes in ways that can ultimately impact the populations they seek to serve. Kendra's journey at the University of Kentucky has given her a deep hands-on understanding of the full commercialization pipeline. She has served as commercialization manager for medical devices, working with UK innovators to develop business models and commercialization plans. She managed the XOR program for Accelerate Network and served as project manager for Connect, the Kentucky Network for Innovation and Commercialization, where she helped innovators develop proposals for proof of concept funding and educated them on the commercialization process. Kendra brings a unique academic blend to this work: a bachelor's degree in forensic science from Eastern Kentucky University and a PhD in pharmacology and an MBA with a concentration in entrepreneurship, both from the University of Kentucky. One of Kendra's signature accomplishments is the creation of the Commercialization and Innovation Leadership Program, or CILP, and the Innovation Training Microcertification, both housed under Launch Blue at UK Innovate. These programs are designed to empower students, ambassadors, and fellows with foundational knowledge in innovation, commercialization, and entrepreneurship through a combination of short course learning modules and hands-on mentorship. Since 2020, Launch Blue has trained 196 individuals through its innovation and entrepreneurial programs, with 26% female and 30% minority founders and innovators, a diverse track record that speaks to the inclusive approach Kendra and her team bring to this work. Kendra, welcome to Autumn on the Air. So excited to have you here on the air.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, very happy to have you here. And I do have to say, you have an absolutely fascinating background. You have a PhD in pharmacology, an MBA in entrepreneurship, and an experience spanning forensic science to medical device commercialization. Tell us, how did you get on this journey that led to your current role as Director of Innovation and Talent Development?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It's definitely been a nonlinear path. So I started in forensics as an undergrad, and at the time, I was still figuring out what I wanted to do. So I knew that I loved being in a lab and solving problems. And through a few research experiences, I became super interested in pursuing graduate school. And then during graduate school, I realized that a traditional bench science career just wasn't the right fit for me. So I knew I didn't want to leave science. However, I wasn't exactly sure how my technical background would translate into a career outside of the lab. So that led me to a fellowship in our technology transfer office during my postdoc, which really shifted my perspective. I was immersed in the science still, but now I was working across disciplines and thinking about translation and commercialization. So then later, as a commercialization manager, I managed a portfolio made up of medical devices and mobile health apps. And that gave me a better understanding of what it actually takes to move an idea forward outside the lab that the university was used to create the impact. So now in my current role, I get to build the kinds of programs that I wish I had when I was in school. So programs that help researchers, students, and innovators understand that their work has value beyond publication and that it could help them diversify the funding streams for their research so that they have even more flexibility and opportunity.
Wow, I will say that was definitely a nonlinear path, that's for sure. Wow, what an amazing journey, though. It's always interesting to see where people start and then where they end up. And, speaking of ending up, you've had several different roles there at UK, from the Connectic project manager to commercialization manager for medical devices to the XOR program. Tell me, how did those experiences help shape your understanding of what aspiring innovation professionals actually need to learn?
Each of these roles gave me a better understanding of some of the gaps we all see as tech transfer professionals, and each role reinforced what I was observing through other roles. As a Kinetic project manager, I was coaching innovators on how to move their early stage research towards a proof of concept stage product. Then, as a commercialization manager, I was evaluating potential licensing opportunities and learning what development stage an industry licensee typically needed to see in order to license academic innovations. So across all of these roles, I kept seeing the same pattern. We have brilliant researchers that are contributing to the wealth of scientific knowledge and discovery. However, they're not always taught to think about the next steps in the process in order to generate that real-world impact. I've learned that the biggest gap is in the understanding of how to think about translation and impact early in research. So for me, those experiences really clarified that if we want to move research towards translation, we have to start earlier, before the disclosure to the office. And we have to equip researchers, innovators, and students with that mindset from the very beginning, not after the fact. And then for tech transfer offices, that earlier engagement also creates that stronger translational awareness and helps build institutional capacity before researchers ever enter the formal commercialization process.
So given what you just said, I'm curious, at what point did you actually realize that there was a gap in how we train people for careers in tech transfer and commercialization, and that you could actually build something to help fill that gap?
I think one thing that also helped to shape my thinking was in my graduate training. So there was this real effort to expose us to careers beyond academia, which was in fact very valuable. We were introduced to industry professionals, and they taught us things like resume building and the importance of networking. But what was really missing was the how. How do you actually network in a meaningful way? How do you talk about your research, or how do you talk about your experience even outside of the language used in the lab? And so beyond that, how do you even engage in those opportunities when you're balancing research expectations and trying to communicate the value of that time to your advisor? It's a very delicate balance and not one that's often addressed directly. And that's something that I really wanted to carry forward and expand on. The fellowship I had in our tech transfer office was incredibly impactful, but I saw an opportunity to really build on that and make it more intentional and extend those kinds of experiences to more students, including our undergraduates. It's not just about giving people opportunities. It's about equipping them with the language and confidence to actually engage in those opportunities in a meaningful way. So we need more people who understand how research moves beyond the lab and can operate at the intersection of science, innovation, commercialization, and impact. Programs like this help students recognize that there are career paths outside of traditional research that still contribute to advancing discovery and moving solutions forward.
Well, let's turn and talk about some of these programs. And I want to start with the CILP, the Commercialization and Innovation Leadership Program. For those of our listeners who are not familiar with CILP, can you give us an overview? What is it and what problem is it designed to solve?
Yeah, CILP is a year-long leadership program designed to give undergraduate students hands-on experience in how research actually moves beyond the university. So at a high level, students work on real projects tied to real innovations in our tech transfer office. That can look like writing marketing abstracts, conducting market research, identifying potential licensees, or mapping stakeholder ecosystems across campus. And our students come in with a wide range of backgrounds. Some have research experience, others are encountering this for the very first time. So part of the process is helping them learn how to engage with innovation, even if the science is outside their area of expertise. But they're not just completing tasks, they're owning the work. We give them the objective, but not a step-by-step process. They have to learn how to operate in the ambiguity, take initiative, and apply their own perspective, which is much closer to what they'll actually experience after they graduate in the workforce, regardless of the industry they enter into. Alongside that, they're building a foundational understanding of translational research, the commercialization process within academia, intellectual property strategies, marketing, outreach, market research, consulting, and even revenue streams. The problem it's designed to solve is that most students don't get exposure to this side of research. And for many of them, they don't yet see how research connects to real-world application or impact, or how they can play a role in that process. CILP bridges that gap by giving them both the knowledge and the experience so they can understand how innovation moves forward and where they fit within it. And from an institutional perspective, it creates earlier engagement points and helps expand translational capacity in a way that's scalable across different types of innovation ecosystems. More broadly, it's a programmatic framework for workforce development that can be adapted across different institutional contexts to help build the next generation of innovation and commercialization talent.
And I think one of the really interesting things that you've done with the program is you've developed these different ambassador tracks. You have the Trust Hub ambassadors, the TC commercialization ambassadors, and the Invest Blue Venture ambassadors. Walk us through, if you would, what each of those tracks involves and how they serve different types of students.
I like to think of CILP as an umbrella. So all students go through the same foundational learning around translational research, commercialization, and impact. And the foundational learning is really that programmatic framework. From there, the applied work varies based on the track that they choose, which is based on our institutional needs. And this is what makes the program so valuable. The framework itself is adaptable. So the core learning and structure remain consistent, but the experiential components can be tailored to different initiatives, portfolios, or interests within an institution. So in that sense, it becomes less of a single program and more of a scalable workforce development model that can support a wide range of innovation and commercialization efforts. That flexibility is especially important for offices that may have very different institutional priorities, staffing models, or levels of commercialization infrastructure. So, for example, our Trust Hub ambassadors support a portfolio of social innovations and community health solutions, often grounded in human-centered design. Our tech commercialization ambassadors work with deep tech innovations, supporting faculty-driven research and thinking through pathways like market potential and licensing. Ambassadors in both of these tracks engage in activities like market research and identifying potential licensees. But the types of partners they're working with and the approaches they take can look very different depending on the innovation. And then we have our Invest Blue Venture ambassadors who work more closely and directly with startups. They support founders from Kentucky-affiliated companies by helping connect them with capital, while also gaining exposure to venture development and the investor side of the ecosystem. So again, while the foundation is consistent, each track gives students a different lens into how innovation moves forward.
It's really fascinating. So you have these different ambassador tracks. How do you match these students to the right track? Are they self-selecting, or is there some type of assessment process?
Students do self-select based on their interest, but there's still an application and interview process built into that. Because of the different tracks, students can apply to more than one area they're interested in, which sometimes means they'll go through multiple interviews for different teams. We guide them through that process, but we're not just looking at their resumes. We're paying close attention to things like curiosity and gumption. The technical skills can be taught. What's much harder to teach is that sense of ownership, curiosity, and willingness to engage in work that operates in ambiguity. And that experience becomes incredibly valuable for them professionally. If you think about almost any job interview you've ever participated in, at some point, someone is asked, tell me about a time when you solved a problem, worked cross-functionally, took initiative, or navigated uncertainty. Through CILP, students are building tangible experiences around those kinds of skills in a real-world environment. And that translates well regardless of what field or career path they ultimately pursue.
Now, you've committed to offering every one of these ambassadors 10 hours weekly to further the mission, and that's a pretty significant investment. So I'm curious, what does a typical week look like for a student ambassador, and what kind of real-world work are they doing during this time?
Yeah, a typical week can definitely vary depending on the project, but students are working on real innovation-focused activities. So that might include conducting market research, identifying potential licensing partners, developing marketing abstracts, or mapping stakeholder ecosystems. But they're also engaging with innovators, attending meetings, and contributing to conversations that help move those projects forward. But what's most important is that they're not working on hypothetical assignments. They're contributing to real projects that have real outcomes, which gives them a much clearer understanding of how this work actually happens in practice.
Now, are you able to share a success story with us? Because it really is amazing here with these different tracks. Maybe a student who came through CILP and then went on to do something remarkable, maybe in innovation or commercialization?
Yeah, we've seen different types of success come out of these programs depending on where students are in their journey and what their interests are. So we had a student from the College of Design shift his graduate interest towards human and machine interaction after spending time with us and seeing innovation from a different perspective. We had another student from the College of Business that leveraged their marketing and revenue generation experience he gained through our office into a competitive internship with a major global company. And that's what's exciting about this work. The students are all coming from different backgrounds, but they're developing transferable skills around problem solving, communication, stakeholder engagement, and innovation that apply across industries. More importantly, they're starting to think differently about how their skills apply, what roles exist, and where they can create impact. And that mindset shift is often the first step that leads to those longer term outcomes.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the innovation training micro-certification. This is really very creative. And I understand this to be a set of short, asynchronous learning modules that are organized around 3 themes: innovation, commercialization, and entrepreneurship. What inspired you to create this, and who is this micro-certification designed for?
So the micro-certification was originally designed for faculty, particularly faculty early in their research careers or those that are starting to think more intentionally about translation and impact. The inspiration for the micro-certification really came from the same pattern I was seeing across all of my roles within UK. So we have a lot of researchers, again, doing excellent work, but thinking through impact and translation isn't always embedded in their training. In some cases, they're not even thinking about it at all. But then in other cases, they're curious and want to move their work forward, but they don't have a clear understanding of the pathway to impact outside of the walls of the university. So the micro-certification was designed to meet people at that point. It provides a structured way to understand how research moves from idea to impact across the themes of innovation, commercialization and impact, and entrepreneurship. So they're not trying to figure it out on their own. And for institutions, it creates a very scalable way to build foundational translational literacy across researchers and students without requiring intensive one-on-one support at every stage. Because it's modular, they can engage with just the piece that's most relevant to where they are, or they can go through the full experience. What we've seen over time is that as faculty engage with the micro-certification and our broader division has increased, they've started sharing it with graduate students and postdocs as well. So we're now seeing growth across the student population too. And that's been a really valuable extension of the program because it helps students understand not just what they're working on in the lab, but also why it matters, how it connects to broader impact, and the role they can play in moving research forward.
Now, the innovation theme includes modules on growth mindset, impact research, and building impact research. And I found it really very interesting because the framing, especially the distinction between lowercase I impact and capital I impact, was just fascinating to me. So can you explain that concept and why that matters for researchers?
Absolutely. So we introduced that distinction to help researchers think more intentionally about what they mean when they say impact. So lowercase I impact is how the term is often used. It can refer to a significant outcome or effect, but it's often viewed through a narrower lens, sometimes focused on a specific result or milestone. However, when we talk about capital I impact, we're shifting that perspective. It's not just an outcome, but it's about whether what you're creating leads to meaningful long-term benefit for a population or community. That shift matters because it changes how researchers approach their work. It encourages them to think more holistically about the problem they're trying to solve, who they're solving it for, and what success actually looks like beyond the immediate result. And that kind of thinking typically comes from a deeper understanding of the community or stakeholders you're trying to serve, not just the technical solution itself. So from a tech transfer perspective, it also broadens the conversation about who engages with their office and why. It creates additional entry points for researchers who may not initially see themselves in traditional commercialization pathways, but are still deeply engaged in translational and impact-driven work. That earlier connection to the office can create stronger long-term engagement and broader participation across the innovation ecosystem. So it's not about redefining the term universally, but it's more about creating a shared way to start thinking more intentionally about impact in this context.
And I found it interesting, too, when I looked at the commercialization theme to see that that covers the journey from idea to impact, protecting your idea through intellectual property, as well as social innovation. Why was it important for you to include social innovation alongside traditional commercialization?
I think we as tech transfer professionals often default to a very traditional view of innovation. So things like drugs, devices, and other deep tech solutions. And that work is incredibly important. Researchers in those spaces need to understand how to de-risk their research outcomes and solutions early, who the stakeholders are, and what barriers they may face when trying to license their solution. But there's a whole other segment of innovation that's happening, especially within institutions, that doesn't always get recognized in the same way. Social innovation is a great example of that. These are individuals who are often already working closely with community partners, and in some cases already have a partner ready to implement their solution, but they don't always see themselves as innovators. Including social innovation in the training is important because it broadens how we define innovation and helps those individuals see themselves reflected in the process and recognize that what they're doing is innovation. It also creates an opportunity for those innovators to think differently about sustainability. Partnering with a tech transfer office or understanding intellectual property strategies can help protect the fidelity and integrity of their work, while also creating pathways for additional resources, partnerships, and long-term support that help sustain and expand the impact they're trying to create. It also broadens the types of innovators engaging with tech transfer offices and expands opportunities for partnerships and community-connected translation. And more broadly, it reinforces a principle we emphasize throughout the program, which is understanding the full process of translational research. That means not just engaging with people you're trying to serve, but also recognizing the broader stakeholder ecosystem and how it informs decision-making.
Now, the third and final theme is entrepreneurship, and that gets into stakeholder engagement, entrepreneurial ecosystems, funding sources, and commercialization planning and grants. This last one, writing commercialization strategy sections in research grants, seems like it could be a real game changer. How are researchers responding to that particular module?
Yeah, so it's still a bit early for us to make strong claims about the impact, but what we are seeing is interest in this area. So writing commercialization strategy sections into grants is not something most researchers have been formally trained to do, even though it's becoming increasingly more important. But often this is framed as a sustainability section, and we've seen an increase in requests for support around how to build that out in a meaningful way. So a big part of this module is simply making that process more visible and approachable. We're also grounding it in real examples. For instance, programs like the NIH Reach Proof of Concept grants are specifically looking for that kind of thinking, where you're not just describing the science, but also how it could move towards real-world application. So this module was also shaped by direct engagement with faculty. I was invited to speak with a group of them on applying business concepts to their research, and that conversation reinforced the need to help researchers think more intentionally about translation and sustainability, what it actually takes to move a solution towards implementation outside of academia, and how to clearly communicate that in a grant. It's really about helping them consider what it takes for a solution to be attractive, adopted, scaled, and sustained.
What I also found really interesting about each of these themes that we've talked about in innovation, commercialization, entrepreneurship is that each is no more than an hour and a half in terms of content. And that's not a whole lot of time. And I know they're intentionally compact. How did you make that decision of what to include, what to leave out? And how do you keep it engaging since it is an asynchronous format?
Yeah, you're right. The compact format was very intentional, and it was, very hard in terms of the words do matter. So I designed the micro-certification to be an on-ramp, not a deep dive. So it's often the first point of connection for researchers or students who are just starting their work or are curious about translation but don't know exactly where to begin. Across institutions, there's a wide range in the level of support and infrastructure available for innovation and commercialization activities. But regardless of institution size, there are still many researchers and students who don't fully understand how their work connects to impact, translation, or the broader innovation ecosystem. So the goal wasn't to cover everything. It was to provide just enough structure and clarity to help them start thinking differently about their work and understand what their next step could be. From there, they can engage more intentionally with innovation resources, translational activities, and programs that support moving research forward. In many ways, it functions as a capacity building tool that tech transfer offices can use by creating a shared foundation before researchers or students move into more resource-intensive programming. So in terms of what to include and leave out, I focused on those early concepts, things like impact, stakeholders, and pathways beyond the lab, and intentionally left the deeper, more technical content for later stage programs like I-Core. And to keep it engaging in an asynchronous format, the modules are designed to be short, focused, and interactive. We use reflection prompts, hypothetical scenarios, so learners can immediately apply the concepts to their own work rather than just passively consuming content.
So how does the micro-certification connect then to the hands-on CILP ambassador experience? Is it a prerequisite, a complement, or do they each stand on their own?
Yeah, so the micro-certification and CILP are designed to complement each other, but they can also stand alone depending on how someone engages. The micro-certification can also complement other existing programs by providing a shared foundation before participants step into more hands-on or advanced experiences. So for CILP specifically, the micro-certification is built into onboarding and orientation. It gives students a shared foundation around impact, translational research, and commercialization as they start working on projects. That translates into a significantly smaller learning curve and creates a shared language and baseline understanding that makes engagement within the office much more efficient. So instead of just completing the tasks, students are able to connect the dots between the work that they're doing and the broader innovation process. They understand not only the impact of the innovations coming through our office, but also the impact of their own contributions in moving those forward. So without that foundation, it would take much longer for them to reach that level of understanding. And at the same time, the micro-certification can stand on its own as an entry point for faculty or students who may not be part of CILP, but still want to understand how research moves from idea to impact.
Now, I want to switch gears a little bit and ask you about workforce development as well as impact, because I know starting off with the workforce development, that's a big part of your mission. You're not just training students, you're building a whole pipeline of future professionals for the innovation and commercialization field. So how do you see your graduates then fitting into the broader tech transfer ecosystem once they leave UK?
So one of the biggest things our students leave with is a set of highly transferable professional skills that they've practiced in a real-world environment. So through the program, they're not just working on hypothetical case studies, they're contributing to actual innovation and commercialization activities. Ambassadors have created marketing abstracts for innovations, conducted market research. They've sent outreach emails to potential licensees, participated in founder calls with startups, and they've even worked on database and process integration projects to help streamline operations for our office. So in addition to the workforce development for the students, they're also contributing meaningfully to institutional capacity and operational support within the innovation ecosystem itself. And through those experiences, they learn how to work collaboratively with one another and with others in the office. They also learn how to operate in the ambiguity, communicate with a variety of stakeholders, and solve problems without being handed a step-by-step process. They're also taking ownership of the projects tied to real-world innovations. Alongside that, they also develop a much stronger understanding of how research, innovation, and impact connect, which opens the door to career paths many of them didn't even know existed. Some go into commercialization of innovation-focused roles directly, while others carry those skills and perspectives into industry, startups, consulting, graduate school, or entirely different sectors. So while their career paths may look different, they're leaving with both the mindset and the workforce readiness to contribute immediately in complex collaborative environments.
Now, you also work with researchers on campus there to help them frame their research outcomes for real-world impact. Talk to us about what that looks like in practice, and what's the most common aha moment you see when a researcher starts thinking about commercialization, maybe for the very first time?
In practice, a lot of that work looks like helping researchers zoom out from the specifics of their project and start thinking more intentionally about the bigger picture. So questions like, who is this for? What problem is it actually solving? And what would need to happen for this to be used outside of the lab? That often comes through conversation, asking targeted questions, and helping them reframe how they're thinking about their work. So it's not just about the science, but it's also about the pathway to adoption. The most common aha moment is when that shift happens and they start to see their work as something that could actually be used and not just studied. That's when they begin thinking more concretely about stakeholders and what success looks like and what needs to happen next. And from the office perspective, those conversations happening earlier create a much stronger foundation for future translational and commercialization activities. And I've been lucky enough to see this play out with a researcher who engaged with the microcertification very early on in her postdoc, while she was still deciding where to take her research. So she later participated in our regional I-Core program, which helped her refine her value proposition and better understand her stakeholders' ecosystem. So what changed was how she approached her work. So she's still doing research, but now she's making more informed decisions about what to pursue, what metrics matter for adoption, and how her research and potential solution fit into the broader process. So that mindset shift is shaping the direction of her research in a very intentional way.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. And that's really great that you were able to achieve that mindset shift. And I'm thinking that some of our listeners are probably thinking about building their own talent development or micro-certification program, having heard you describe the one there at UK. If listeners are looking to do that, what advice would you give them? Where do you suggest they even start?
Yeah, so I should probably start by reaching out to us to license the program. But honestly, I think the bigger starting point is asking why this matters for your institution and what problem you're actually trying to solve. Most tech transfer offices are balancing limited time, limited capacity, and increasing expectations around engagement, workforce development, and demonstrating ROI, or what I like to call return on impact. So the question becomes, could something like this help drive culture change on your campus? Could it create earlier engagement with researchers and students? Could it help build translational awareness and strengthen the broader innovation ecosystem around your office? And then from there, institutions have to think strategically about the buy versus build conundrum. No one has the time or the resources to reinvent the wheel every single time. So the real goal is figuring out how to be both effective and efficient in building programs that expand capacity, support workforce development, and ultimately help move innovation forward. For us, that's really been the value of this work. It creates a scalable way to increase engagement, build translational understanding, and develop innovation talent in a way that can adapt to different institutional contexts.
Now, what were some of the biggest challenges you found in building these programs, and what did you learn from them? I think that's important for our listeners to know in advance as well.
Yeah, very important. So one of the biggest challenges has been time and attention. So we're trying to engage people early at a point where they're already balancing a lot and may not yet see the immediate relevance of this kind of training. Because of that, embedding the content into existing experiences has been critical but challenging. So it requires a much deeper understanding of the audience, where this fits into their existing programs, and strong partnerships with the people already supporting these populations. A big part of the process has been listening to those partners, understanding their needs and constraints, and being willing to adapt the approach so it complements what they're already doing rather than creating additional burden. What I've learned from that is the importance of truly understanding your audience and being very intentional with how I communicate value. So it's not enough to say something is important. You have to clearly connect it to what people are already doing and why it matters to them in that moment. And then beyond communicating value, you have to demonstrate it. So as people begin to see how these programs support workforce development, increase engagement, and create earlier connections to innovation and commercialization activities, those partnerships become much stronger and more sustainable over time. And that's where we've seen the greatest institutional traction, when people recognize that this isn't just educational programming, but a way to expand engagement and build translational capacity more strategically. In many ways, it's the same principle we teach in the micro-certification, understanding your stakeholder and communicating value in a way that resonates. Building these programs has reinforced that for me in a very practical way.
So looking ahead then, Kendra, where do you want to take CILP and the micro-certification over the next few years? Are you going to be adding new modules, new partnerships, or new audiences to reach?
Yeah, so this is probably another point where I should say licensing. But in all seriousness, one of the things we're most excited about is seeing this expand beyond our own institution. So we've already started piloting the micro-certification with external partners like Kentucky Commercialization Ventures. And that's been incredibly validating because it has shown us that this framework can adapt to different institutional environments and needs. We're continuing to explore additional partnerships and licensing opportunities as a way to expand engagement and build translational capacity more broadly. And importantly, it allows institutions to adapt the framework to their own ecosystem needs rather than trying to build these kinds of initiatives entirely from scratch. At the same time, our next phase is really focused on embedding the micro-certification more intentionally into existing academic experiences, particularly to reach earlier stage learners. So that includes undergraduate research programs and capstone courses where students can connect those concepts to real-world applications earlier in their training. We've already started to see that with a marketing capstone, where students worked on real social innovations to develop marketing plans and strategic recommendations. Now we're looking at how to expand that model into other areas like engineering, where students could engage with innovation concepts earlier in the process. And then, of course, we're continuing to evolve the content itself, developing new modules and materials based on what we're seeing learners and institutions need as they move through this process.
If there were, Kendra, one thing that perhaps maybe you could change about how universities approach innovation training and workforce development in the commercialization space, what would that be?
So if I could change one thing, it would be to embed innovation and impact much earlier in the academic experience. So right now, a lot of this training is introduced later, often after a faculty member or researcher has already developed something. But by that point, they've already made a number of decisions without thinking about translation, stakeholders, or real-world application. If faculty and researchers were introduced to these concepts earlier and more consistently as part of the research ecosystem, it would start to influence how projects are framed from the beginning. Translation, adoption, and stakeholder considerations would become part of the research process rather than something addressed later after the fact. That leads to more intentional research decisions over time, which leads to stronger engagement opportunities for tech transfer offices and innovation ecosystems overall. And there's a broader institutional impact as well. When innovation and impact are embedded into the academic culture, it shapes how students, researchers, and faculty engage with their work and with each other. It creates an environment where translational thinking becomes part of the norm rather than a separate activity. And that shift from being reactive to proactive is where I think universities have a real opportunity to change how innovation and workforce development happens.
Now, Kendra, as the podcast comes to a close, I wanted to ask you, for a student or maybe early career professional that's listening to this podcast and who's perhaps curious about a career in tech transfer innovation, what's the first step that they should take?
So the first step is really about curiosity and taking the initiative to explore the space. So start by learning what this field actually is and how it connects to your background. That can be as simple as asking questions, having conversations with people in the space, or attending events where this work is being discussed. From there, it's looking for opportunities to get involved, even in small ways. So internships, fellowships, or programs like CILP are great, but just showing interest and being willing to engage can open doors. And as you do that, start thinking about how to talk about your own experience differently. Not just what you've done, but why it matters, who it serves, and how it could be applied beyond the lab. So you don't have to have it all figured out. So if you remember my nonlinear path to get to where I am now, it was never about me having it all figured out. It was about me being curious and asking questions, about taking that first step to open up to opportunities that you didn't even know existed. And honestly, don't hesitate to reach out to people in the space. Most of us are more than willing to have those conversations and help you get started.
Well, thank you for that, Kendra. And thank you for this amazing conversation, and congratulations on the CILP and microcertification programs. They're absolutely amazing, and continued success to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Kendra, thank you so much for joining us today. What you're building at the University of Kentucky is exactly what our field needs: a structured, inclusive, and practical pathway for the next generation of innovation and commercialization professionals. The Commercialization and Innovation Leadership Program and the Innovation Training Microcertification are powerful models that other institutions can learn from, and the results speak for themselves. For our listeners, we'll include links in the show notes to UK Innovate, Launch Blue, and the Innovation Training Microcertification, so you can explore what Kendra and her team have built. If you're thinking about how to develop talent pipelines at your institution, this is a great place to start. Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air. We'll see you again next week.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at autm.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.